Mr. Daines?
Yeah, I think we have a great example right here in Montana with what happened with the PPL.
Okay.
And I'd like to see a piece of legislation that would take regulations that have more than $100 million impact on our economy to make sure they have congressional approval and oversight. The concerns I hear as we travel all over the state, whether we're talking to farm and ag producers, whether we're talking to those in the energy industry, small business owners, again, is this overreach of regulations. I think it'd be a tangible thing we could do here that could help restore some confidence in this uncertainty of the regulatory environment we live in today.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Mr. Kaiser, do you support continuation of the Bush-era tax cuts for all income levels, or would you rescind them only for those who earn more than $250,000 annually?
When the Bush tax cuts were originally put in place, they were supposed to be permanent. But the Republicans and Democrats decided to make it a political football and to have it expire around election time, so that we had to have this discussion. So really, the tax cuts should have stayed. They were supposed to be permanent, and I would keep them that way.
Ms. Gillen, I beg your pardon, Mr. Daines.
Yes, so now is not the time to be raising taxes on job creators. Interesting, as we look at Montana, 69% of the jobs in the private sector, according to an E&Y study, Ernst & Young study done, show that these job creators are paying taxes at the individual tax rate, not as corporations. In fact, 95% of the businesses in Montana pay taxes at the individual tax rate, not as corporations in terms of C corps, according to the U.S. Federal Code. What that means is that if we allow these taxes to go up, we're taking dollars out of the pocket of job creators and sending them back to Washington. I'd rather see those dollars stay in the pockets of job creators and put them in the pockets of new taxpayers, which are new jobs being created here in the state of Montana.
And now Ms. Gillen.
The middle class has traditionally played a very important role, not just in Montana's economy, but in the national economy. One of my key concerns that seems to be lost in the Ryan budget is that we should make sure that the tax burden on middle-class folks, hardworking families that buy things at the local store, volunteer in the PTA or whatever, that they are treated in taxation fairly. So I believe that we should continue the Bush tax cuts for families that make less than $250,000 a year and do away with tax incentives that encourage people to ship jobs overseas. That's not fair to the hardworking families in Montana, and we need to have someone to step up and be a champion for them and not be a champion for companies that continue to send jobs overseas, outsource, and those other things that are encouraged by the Ryan budget.
Ms. Gillen, for those cuts for those earning north of $250,000, don't those present a little bit of predictability for the business owners, for people who take the risks to create businesses and hire people? Doesn't that help, in a way, stimulate the economy or not?
Well, that's a great question. However, I would contend that one of the reasons that we are in this very difficult debt situation is because of the Bush tax cuts. You know, look at Montana. We have there are very few people and I've served on taxation for a long time. We need to have a fair and predictable tax policy. And I do think that it would be fair and predictable if we sent a clear signal that families making less than $250,000 will have a continuation of these important programs. We've heard it in the last couple of years, actually, that those who make more have been willing to step up because they know that those investments in infrastructure and in education have helped them make their corporations great. And you know, the one thing that I love about Montana, and you hear it wherever you go, everyone is always willing to pay their fair share. And that is why I am concerned that my opponent, Mr. Daines, is so quick to support the Ryan budget, which really, in my opinion, is not fair to the 96% of hardworking middle-class folks in Montana.
Mr. Daines.
Yeah, well, again, I'm just grateful I got to be part of an executive team that created 550 jobs there in Bozeman, Montana. And I can tell you that it's important that we keep job creators incentivized to create those jobs and to create high-paying jobs. Our average wage there in Bozeman was $70,000 a year. And these are great jobs in a clean industry that everybody loves. And I can tell you that we just rather have those dollars going in the pockets of Montanans who are working here versus going back to the pockets of bureaucrats back in Washington with tax increases.
Briefly, Mr. Kaiser.
Kim just mentioned that everyone needs to pay their fair share. What people don't know is there's these hidden costs. When you look at a loaf of bread and you take it from being planted and you have it then shipped off to the wholesaler, and then it's packaged, and then it's shipped off to the retailer, and then you're the end buyer. What you don't know is that loaf of bread, 30% of its cost is tax. It's 40% on a can of pop, 61% on a bottle of liquor. These are taxes you don't see. It's all the fees, the regulations, and she wants you to pay more. I think right now they said 56% of our income goes to one form or another of tax. I think we're paying way too much.
Let's talk about health care for a few minutes. I'd like to hear from each of you about whether or not you support the Affordable Care Act and why. If your answer is no, what about it do you find objectionable, and what would you do as an alternative to expand health coverage to uninsured Americans and to reduce health care costs nationwide? If you do support the Affordable Care Act, how would you pay for it? And also, how do you justify your support for it, given recent polling that showed a majority of Montanans oppose the Affordable Care Act? We'll start with Mr. Daines.
Yeah, thanks, Sherry. Well, when the Obamacare passed Congress, we were trying to solve the problem of accessibility and affordability of our healthcare system. Clearly, it's not delivering either one. The original price tag on Obamacare was promised to be about $900 billion over a 10-year horizon. The Congressional Budget Office just updated their numbers here. Their 2014 10-year projections now have it at $1.9 trillion. That's the concern in terms of trying to drive affordability here in our healthcare system. Clearly, I support repealing the President's Affordable Care Act, and we need to replace it with tort reform. I've chatted with a doctor here just recently that said about 30% of his costs were related to practicing defensive medicine for fear of litigation. We need to replace it with transparency. Consumers need to have full transparency on what they're paying. Right now, clearly, the insurance companies seem to know what's being paid, but the consumer sometimes is left out of the equation. I think third is portability, allowing consumers the ability to take their health care and let it move with you, just like your cell phone number now stays with you when you change providers. We need to have that kind of flexibility in our system. I just don't think that Washington is going to lead us down a path of solving this problem. And I think that's the concern right now with this mandate from the Obamacare law.
Mr. Kaiser, Affordable Care Act.
I would repeal it. Anytime you take a 2,400-page bill and it's written from an outside private company and it's passed, and in order to get it passed, you have to bribe your senators with perks or pork projects. Also in the bill, you have a couple of items that have nothing to do with health care, giving President Obama executive orders and also having the United States take over all of the student loans. With health care, a lot of the problems can be back in history. The HMOs, where they started to, instead of pay as you go, it started paying small fees where you can go as often as you want. And then from there, it escalated with a couple of other problems within the federal government, and am I cut off?
Ms. Gillen.
Yes. I think we can all agree that every Montanan and everyone in the United States